Hello, everyone. I'm Barbara Ham-Lee. On today's Another View Roundtable, we discuss a topic you probably haven't given much thought, but that will become more and more a reality as our country changes. According to the 2014 census, by 2044, those who identify as white will no longer be in the majority, which raises the issue, who's responsible for making sure that white people become comfortable with their new minority status? Is it up to white people to embrace the change, or is it up to Black and brown people to help them adjust? Stick around for this conversation. It's truly food for thought. Another View will be right back.
Discussing today's topics from an African American perspective, this is Another View.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Another View. I'm Barbara Ham-Lee. So good to be with you this beautiful Friday afternoon, and it's the second Friday of the month, which means it's time for the Another View Roundtable. But before I introduce our pundits for today, I do want to remind you that Congressman Bobby Scott is holding two town halls. One is in Newport News, Monday, August the 13th at Homer L. Hines Middle School. It is at 6:30 p.m. And the second one is the Chesapeake Town Hall on Tuesday, August the 14th at 6:30. And that is being held at the Camelot Community Center on King Arthur Drive in Chesapeake. So if you have some things you'd like to hear about what's happening in Washington or some things you'd like to share with the congressman, I'm sure he would love to see you there. He wants to talk about what's going on with the Affordable Care Act, the growing cost of recent tax cuts and legislation he has recently introduced to provide every student with an opportunity to earn a debt-free college degree. So those two town halls, one in Newport News at the Homer L. Hines Middle School on McLawnhorn Drive in Newport News, and Chesapeake Town Hall on Tuesday the 14th at the Camelot Community Center on King Arthur Drive in Chesapeake. So let's meet our roundtable. He's a professor of English at Old Dominion University, award-winning author, and former poet laureate. You passed on the baton, Tim. Mr. Tim Seibles.
They made me give it up, though.
They made you give it up, huh?
Why?
Welcome. We're so happy to have you back here. She's responsible for the money in the city of Norfolk. Meet City Treasurer Daun Hester. Hey, Daun.
Hey, glad to be here.
I'm so glad to have you here with the fellas this time.
Yeah.
Huh? He's our favorite community activist and has been with us since the beginning of Another View. Mr. Bill Thomas, how are you, sir?
Are there any Republican town hall meetings in the next week or so?
I don't know.
Oh, you should find out. Let's be fair and balanced.
You're right. I should be fair and balanced.
Okay.
And if someone had sent me some information, I would tell them about the Republican ones, too. Absolutely.
Well, do that.
And we have a new pundit joining us for the Another View Roundtable. He's a retired Marine officer and practicing international attorney, introducing Mr. Butch Bracknell. Butch, welcome to Another View.
Thanks, Barbara. Thanks for having me. I'm
Absolutely. Move your mic over just a little bit more so everybody can hear you. There you go. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
I served 22 years in the Marines. I'm a North Carolina native. I've lived here in Hampton Roads since 2006. I remain excited about living in Hampton Roads and want to keep plugging in wherever I can and give my thoughts where they're warranted and learn new perspectives from other folks all the time.
Fantastic. Well, we welcome you to the show.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. So there was an article in the Washington Post recently entitled White and in the Minority. She speaks English, her coworkers don't. Inside a rural chicken plant, whites struggle to fit in. And it was a very long article about two people who live in Pennsylvania in a town that is predominantly Hispanic. And the premise of the whole article was the fact that these two white people found it very difficult to assimilate. They, at the factory, everybody spoke Spanish. They didn't feel welcome. They didn't feel a part of it, and so forth. And it got me to thinking about the fact that since the census says that in 2044, this country is going to be majority going forward. And Black folks in general have always had a tradition of being the welcoming community, if you will, and the one to take folks in and so forth. And I started thinking, so how are white people going to be able to adjust to this whole idea of being a minority? And is it our responsibility to make them feel welcome, feel better, participate, or is it up to them to figure it out, as many of us have had to do in our coming up of age? So, Tim, I'm going to start with you and kind of throw it out there. What do you think?
The answer to that question, I think, is complicated. I think certainly the discourse on race, the ways in which people imagine themselves as black, white, brown, red, yellow, and so on, is changing somewhat because of the kinds of cross-pollination that is taking place between the cultures. So I don't know whether the kind of exclusion that black folks and brown folks may have suffered early or in American history will be anything like whites will suffer. So I don't think their transition from being majority to minority will be quite as traumatic. It's not like suddenly we're going to relegate them to white-only bathrooms and white-only. We're not going to push them aside the ways in which we were.
So there won't be Jim Crow laws for white folks.
Yeah, there will not be. So I think the transition for them will be simpler. And in addition to that, of course, the complexities of the number of interracial marriages, biracial children, I think it'll be a different kind of dynamic. This is not to say that white supremacists and other kind of lost souls won't be out there, screaming and yelling about the world coming to an end because more brown folks exist than white folks in America. But I just think that that I think they will sound like the dinosaurs they are. Ultimately, not to say they can't cause trouble. But I do think that, I don't know, we should be going out of our way as people of color to try to make them feel at home. If anything, I think that might make it even more embarrassing in a certain way. I just think if we continue down the road of sanity and honest interactions, well, hopefully the adjustments will be made comfortably to the extent that it's possible for everybody.
Well, Bill, I see you shaking your head. Now, they call it demographic anxiety. And on this day, the weekend of the anniversary of Charlottesville, there's a lot of back and forth about whether or not, this whole idea of taking back the country and losing their identity and so forth. Do you see some validity?
I think this is, Barbara, I love you to death. But there's so many things going on in this story. It's really insanity. Number one, the majority of the people in this chicken picking plant, is that what we're doing?
Yeah, it's a chicken processing plant.
Okay, they pick the fish.
That's the premise to start the conversation, Bill.
The majority are not speaking English.
Right.
The majority of who?
The majority of the workers.
They can't speak English.
They don't speak English at the plant. They didn't say they couldn't. They don't.
But can they? Well, how could? Okay, that's one thing. Number two, my friend, all of these right-wing Nazis and crazies and all these other people are going to start kicking something up. This isn't nothing about that either. The issue is they don't have no power. They work in a chicken plant. Mm-hmm. The power, you could go down to 2% others over us. They still got the power. So what difference does it make?
What type of power are you talking about?
Economic, political, cultural, religion. They own that code. They own us in terms of us not being able to compete for ourselves. This is just one of these liberals, crazy, make-up fake news stories that the Washington Post has put in here just to agitate things. You want to be acceptable, and you want the other folks, the few little white folks that are poor white trash, are probably somebody that's working there because they would be working someplace else that didn't. They have to work there. Please believe me. And people that don't have things, those white folks are in just as much jeopardy as those other folks.
So is your point then it will be more of a classist issue as opposed to a racial issue?
It's an economic issue. It's not class or race.
Okay.
Some of you folks just keep on hitting on this issue of, the white man got me. I don't care if there was 1% of white folks in this America. As the system exists today, with the policies and the laws, we would still be on the bottom getting beat up on the rock. Okay. It's not about that. You're trying to make it something different.
All right, hold on. Let me make sure we hear from everybody else. Dawn, what do you think?
I don't, listening to Bill, I just don't know where to go with this. But anyway.
Hi, Dawn.
There is a fear, I think, amongst some. Of course, yes, the extreme, there is a fear. And I don't really know if that is fear or if it's just that, they just want to be always in control.
Absolutely.
But they're not necessarily in control of even themselves. if you look at their demographics and where they live and the things that they do, the work and their economic viability. So, so you've got that spectrum, but, there are people who believe that. As it relates to this article, I thought it was interesting that the two white workers chose to be there.
Absolutely.
Okay, they chose to be there. They were still making 13-something an hour. So, which said to me, okay, so the Hispanics are making that too. So, okay, so they doing their quality of living. And then they said everybody was there, mama, daddy, sister, brother. Everybody was working. So they're building their economic advantage in, the best way that they can, where they can work.
There was to your point, there was an interesting quote out of the article that says, and I quote, "There were days when Vincent," he was one of the white people that they profiled, "there were days when Vincent imagined what might await America. This would be the nation where whites weren't only a minority, but disadvantaged, punished for their collective crimes because, as he put it, quote, we haven't been the nicest race. Speaking Spanish wouldn't just be beneficial, but essential, and people like him would never be able to recover from what they didn't know. Screwed for life," he said.
Yeah, and and they're young people. In this article,
they're 18 and 25.
Right,
I
yeah.
think.
So they're young people, and they want to stay home, which is an issue, especially in rural areas across our country. You want to try to keep your family, your children home, but learn how to speak Spanish or have the conversation in English, and you can't go to work and not speak. Well, she did, he didn't.
Right.
You can't go to work and not speak to people all day. And people who speak Spanish, they speak a little bit of English enough to be able to have a conversation. And so, there's gonna be that balance of what you're gonna have to do. But there is a fear, I believe, around the country of that status changing.
But she said, her name was Heaven. She said she'd never thought of herself as prejudiced and still didn't, but there were increasingly times when she felt so far on the outside, so little understood, that her alienation was hardening into something closer to anger and possibly worse. Like when she had to clock in and felt pushed out of the way, or when people said gringa and she experienced a flash of paranoia that they were talking about her, or when supervisors separated Spanish speakers from English speakers for training videos, sometimes leaving Heaven in a room alone except for a guy whom she believed only spoke French. I mean, there's that whole idea of fear turning into anger. I mean, to me, that was kind of indicative of what we're seeing happening in the country across the board.
She was on the other foot now, huh? I mean, white people in America have had from the beginning came to America, we're the minority, right? They managed to cope with it. But the bottom line is, it's the greatest incentive is on whites to try to figure out this demographic shift is happening. You may not, certain groups of whites might not want it to happen, but it's very difficult to deny that the wave is coming. Americans overall, are kind of in a unique position in the world. I travel widely. I've traveled in South America. I've traveled some in Asia. I've traveled some in Africa, and I've traveled a lot in Europe. We're kind of the only nation in the world that's as linguistically isolated as we are. We have an ocean to the east and an ocean to the west. Nobody's talking there. Right, we have an English-speaking neighbor to the north, except for Quebecois, and then we have a pretty compliant neighbors to the south, and the Spanish that is, the language that is most commonly spoken other than English in the United States is of course Spanish, with 20-some-odd% of the population speaking both languages. We're lagging the rest of Europe. You go to any spot in Europe and sit down and then walk 100 miles in any direction, and you're probably speaking a different language. And they've embraced that, and they know that. I know lots of folks who speak 4 languages because they realized it was necessary to get along. It was necessary to do commerce. And America is lagging that by historical sort of happenstance. But whites have to start figuring out how to embrace getting north on this problem a little more than we have historically.
Bill, I saw you go apoplectic when Daun and Butch both said this whole idea of learning to speak a different language, learning to engage in a different way.
I didn't say it from that standpoint. When we went to public schools, we had to learn how to speak 2 languages, and the mother of all language is Latin. So it's not nothing uncommon, especially to our community while I was growing up. So we had to speak French, we had to take French, we had to take Spanish, and we had to take Latin so we could become good scholars. And we were taught that. That's not my issue.
Okay.
My issue is, number one, is that I think this is a fake, bogus story because, but if it is true, this stuff has been going on in America for the past 300 years. They'd isolate people and work them as slaves or get them to do jobs menial jobs that nobody don't want to do with the chickens or with picking cotton or tomatoes or apples or whatever else. That culture still is here. The shame of it all is that whatever, I don't know who owns this company, I wish we knew Purdue or whoever owned the company, shame on them. They should be for not teaching the folks that they're hiring how to converse in the language of the country that they now live in.
But that's not their responsibility.
Yes,
Go ahead, Daun.
If you're going
It's
to
not
be,
the company's responsibility to teach that.
if the company plans to, no, if they're going to keep the people where they are, that is correct. But as this gentleman just said, if you're going to be a universal country, a universal world, or other things like that, you're going to teach people the native language of the country they live in. It's to your advantage, unless you plan on exploiting them for the rest of their lives.
Well, I think that's why a part of the issue is in this community and others, you have Hispanics coming in to work, changing the demographics of the entire community because they're living there, but they're working and getting the job done and getting paid.
Okay.
And if they have children,
Go ahead,
their
Ted.
children are learning
Their
English.
children are in the school
I mean,
systems.
the dynamic is in,
Right.
is
You
in
know,
movement.
now the company itself, you know, the people up there at the top, they probably do speak languages because they sending these chickens all across the country. Or well, across the world. So, you know, they're probably speaking the language, but in the where they're processing the meat.
Go ahead, Butch.
This idea that we're a multilingual country is just kind of silly. I mean, when's the last time you spoke French? Even if you learned it. Latin's a dead language, right? So Latin isn't spoken, it isn't used to communicate, it isn't used in commerce. Well, it's only used in mass.
You asked me a question. Let me answer it.
Sure.
Actually, when I got my first job at a multinational bank in Cleveland in New York, I was sent to do banking correspondence in countries outside of America, London, Hong Kong, Brazil. So we had to have command of the language, and because I had command of at least being able to be communicative in those languages, it helped me rise in my career very quickly.
You're uniquely positioned in the American experience.
Yeah, but it did help me. But your point is quite clear. I think that our culture, our schools, should be teaching languages of just as you have expressed, because now we are in a global community, and it's to America's advantage to have our citizenry educated to a point where they understand, at least to be able to communicate with people of other languages.
But language is just one part of this. Let me play a clip from the Bill Maher show that happened, and this is a comment from Charles Blow, who is an author and a columnist for the New York Times.
Because this whole conversation after 2016 was about how do we make white people feel less anxious and afraid, more comfortable. Isn't that a very curious thing to tell the rest of us who all lived our lives feeling afraid, uncomfortable, anxious, that we now have to make white people feel good?
I guess I should have set up, but also since you can't see him, that Charles Blow is African American. So the whole idea of us having to make others feel comfortable.
You said that.
Well, I mean, no, I'm just saying. I think,
I think that they do.
I mean, this is not to say that, as black folks or people of color in general, that we shouldn't, certainly try to usher in the change with velvet gloves rather than iron fist. I'm certainly more than happy to talk reasonably and compassionately with my white brethren and sisters. But I don't know that I would lose sleep at night worrying about how to make them feel comfortable when the transition comes on, any more so than I do now worrying about how this society might work better if we understood a little more clearly what makes a sane society as opposed to an insane society. I mean, that keeps me up at night, probably, and will continue to keep me up at night more than worrying about the comfort of white people insofar as the future is concerned, and they're moving from a majority to
Well,
minority
I found this interesting. Pauli Murray Project, which is the Pauli Murray Center for History and Social Justice. It's associated with Duke University in Durham, North Carolina. And they are holding a workshop. It costs $475, okay, for this workshop. And it is called Doing Our Own Work, an anti-racism seminar for white people. God. And it is specifically for white people. Doing Our Own Work is an intensive seminar for white people who seek to deepen their commitment to confronting white privilege and challenging racism in all of its forms.
Great.
proactive.
Is Curtis Blow going to be there as well?
Curtis Blow as in
the guy
musician?
you just recorded on the
No,
TV.
Charles Blow is his name. Bill, I tell you, let's talk to Greg in Virginia Beach. Hi, Greg, you're on the air.
Hello, everyone. I guess I was calling because I disagree wholeheartedly with the gentleman who indicated that if there was a transition in growth of a majority and minority of people, that if 1% of the majority was left with only 1% and they were now the minority, they would still have the power because they have the economic structure. I think in a vacuum, he's absolutely right. However, we all know that the majority has been attempting, or a lot of people have been attempting to stop us from voting. And there's a reason for that, because they know voting is power. So now you have a majority of brown people who have the power to vote. Also with the power of vote, you have the power to point where you want the United States dollar to go. You also have the power to change some of the rules about where you can live, what kind of rent, what kind of mortgage you're going to pay, what interest rate you're going to be paying for certain groups of people. So then that dynamic of power, economic power, starts to change. Will it happen overnight? Absolutely. But the transition is not happening overnight. And what I'm starting to witness with my own eyes is the economic power is shifting very slowly, but it is shifting. And so I definitely believe that once and when brown people are the majority in this country, those power dynamics are going to shift with the majority.
Okay, Greg, thanks so much for your call. We appreciate that. Anybody want to respond to Greg?
Well, I mean, just
Tim?
for example, the fact that LeBron James is as a black man, has the financial wherewithal to start a school, to have a school and give every student a bike, and to pay at least to promise to pay for each of their college education. Certainly, that is a marker of a shift in terms of financial power. Certainly, when I was a teenager, I knew of no such black person doing such a thing. There may have been some, but now you have a high-profile person like LeBron James who will change the way people think about what's possible, because we have a number of black folks with substantial bank accounts who could become much more engaged in the education system and in the ways in which the social discourse proceeds.
We are so at loss with our history. That comment just blows my mind. 50, 75, 80 years ago, great African-American leadership like T.C. Walker from Gloucester created 5,000 lab schools across the southern states of America with the chairman of Sears Roebuck so that black people get educated. He raised money with Booker T. Washington. They raised hundreds of thousands of dollars, which is $1 million equivalent at that time. We're just rewriting history that we don't understand. This has been happening in the black community for hundreds of years. Where great black people, it's not great, it's wonderful.
It is great.
And were those schools universal, or were they just for African Americans?
African Americans couldn't go to school in North Carolina, South Carolina in the 30s and 40s. They were segregated. They couldn't go to school at all, period.
Okay, but I'm talking about the schools he built.
Exclusively for black children.
Black children. Oh, yeah. Right.
And it was, and I know Daun Hester understands that as well, but we don't even understand that. I mean, they created 5,000, 2,000. This guy down here, T.C. Walker, is just a monumental hero that's right down the street in Gloucester that did these things. And they did it consistently. What we have gotten about, we just got out of that issue of looking at our three pillars: the family, the church, and humanity among ourselves, where we had the spiritual awakening, where we knew we had to take care of ourselves. So I applaud Mr. James for doing that. And he should have, and he could have, and he did. That's a great thing. But to let people in this audience think that that is the first time that has happened,
I never said it was the first.
But no, or is it?
Well, but he was. I believe Tim, you were responding to the caller.
No,
is that right?
No. But I'm just saying. I don't even want to call. I want the caller to know that.
Okay.
We're proud people. We're smart people. We've been doing this for hundreds of years, and maybe thousands of years, and a lot of people just don't know about it. I'm sorry. Go on.
Daun?
I don't know what to say. I think a lot of people know about it.
Put a mic
a
up
lot
so
of
we
people
can
know
hear.
about it.
Okay.
A lot of people know our history. Do we talk about it enough? No. And I think that's because we're trying to talk about our future and where we're going to go and how we're going to get there. So even though, yes, we've had those in the past who have been supportive, who have helped with education, with the business community, with all those aspects of life and living, it is nice to be able to see that another person has decided to give and put his investment into changing the culture of a community, because this is a public school, which means that he's going to be changing the neighborhood in which these children come from because of the education that the children will provide, because they'll have the supports and resources that we desire for all of our children to have, which if we just look right here in our city, we're trying to provide those things in Norfolk. However, they aren't there yet. So, so it's great in what he's doing. We need more people to step up and do those types of things and provide the resources that are needed for children who are behind academically for whatever the reason might be, to help change the culture also in our neighborhoods.
There's a professor out of East Carolina University in Greenville who says, his name is Brian Glover, and he said the whole notion of whiteness as we know it depends on not being a minority. Okay, and he's saying that people of color are moving into the mainstream now. White is no longer the default setting for American. I think that's part of this discussion also, in the sense that it was always thought that if you were white, you were America, and what we're saying is that now America is a whole rainbow of colors, and as they become in the minority, that privilege of being the center, it will no longer be there. His point was, he says the country is changing in ways that aren't very good for me, talking about himself, and I've got no choice but to adapt. I'm not complaining. It's only fair that other people get the same opportunity we got. He says, but now I find myself looking at whites with new respect. Though there were many notable exceptions, for the most part, during their fall from power, they conducted themselves with quiet dignity. I'm sure it didn't feel good for them at the time, but for the most part, they just got on with their lives. So there are a lot of people who are studying this issue. It's not just a throwaway issue, Bill, but the fact that the country is changing.
It is a throwaway issue because it's not going to accomplish anything, as we have not done for the past 400 years.
440
consistently.
440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240 are the numbers to call. We're talking about changing demographics in the United States with our Another View Roundtable. Former poet laureate and English professor Tim Seibles, Norfolk City Treasurer Daun Hester, community activist Bill Thomas, and retired Marine and international attorney Butch Bracknell. Let's talk to Michael from Virginia Beach. Hi, Michael. You're on the air.
Hey, how are you guys doing today?
Doing good.
I just wanted to comment on this. You kind of, where you just ended off at was exactly where I wanted to pick up. I got to plug my fiance here for a second. She is Mexican-American. When she joined the military, she did not have her citizenship. She obtained her citizenship while on active duty. She's now, her and I are both veterans. We're both now service-connected disabled veterans. And the thing, since I've been in this relationship with her, is I've been exposed to things that I probably would have never been exposed to before, as far as Hispanic culture and things of that nature go, because of my close proximity to somebody of Mexican-American descent. Last Thanksgiving is a good point. They were trying to make it all-inclusive and speak English around me, even though there was 15 of them and one of me. And I made it a point. I said, no. I said, if I'm going to practice what I've learned, I said, speak your native tongue. Don't try to accommodate me. And that's what we do in most situations, as far as family situations are concerned. Mm-hmm. And I hate to say this, but since the election of this current president, I have noticed more things, and maybe it's because of the woman that I'm with now, I've noticed more things that as a white man I probably would have never noticed before, especially when it comes to her and I and her two kids conversating in Spanish. Sometimes we don't want the whole world to know what we're talking about, put it that way. So we speak in a different tongue. Mm-hmm. And people look at us weird. And I'm sure it's always occurred, but my racial bias prevented me from noticing it until somebody this close to me in my life was experiencing it. And I pick up on it so much now. The only constant in this world is change. And racial and cultural demographics in this country are changing, whether we like it or not. And, I mean, get on board the bus or step off and get out of the way, because, I mean, this is the process of change. And I can't, all I can speak from is my own point of view. The only point of view I'll ever try to speak from is my own. But,
thank you, Michael. We appreciate that, and we appreciate your point of view. I mean, he is saying a lot of what we've been saying. Go ahead, Butch, respond. Thanks for the call, Michael.
I'm in exactly the same situation as Michael. I'm also engaged to a Latina, Mexican-American, and she speaks Spanish on the phone, and her family lives in Mexico and in California. And I, too, have become attuned to stuff that would have just gone right over my head otherwise, or I was insufficiently savvy or insufficiently situationally aware to understand some of the biases that I see. And I see them now, and I'm like, oh, my God, this guy is doing that thing right out in public without the sneers, the dirty looks, it's implicit bias that you can't, I mean, it couldn't, if they were wearing a sign around their neck is the only way they could be more clear about it. And I never had, I'm embarrassed to say I wasn't. Well, why would I have been, I guess, but I'm giving myself an out there. But now it hits me front and center. And the other point that I was going to make is this idea that of America being an English-speaking country. America was colonized from two different directions, right? It was colonized from the north and east, and it was from the south and the west. The governmental documents were written in English. English became the language of commerce because a lot of the commerce went back and forth across the Atlantic Ocean. But English doesn't really have necessarily a grandly superior cultural claim to being the American language than over Spanish, and then once you get over that hump, you can sort of understand that every country can have multiple languages and thrive having multiple languages. Go to the UK right now, or go to any European city and walk down the street, or even New York City, and you will hear 10 different languages in 2 city blocks.
Mm-hmm. You know what? Something that'll bring it home, and Daun, I know you'll be able to relate to this only because we're women. But if you go to the nail salon, and if the nail salon happens to be Vietnamese or of another culture, they speak their language. They speak both languages,
right?
And so, rather than one way that I deal with it, rather than insist on them speaking English, Bill, I have asked them to teach me some of their Vietnamese words so that I can learn something new. I mean, I guess my point is, instead of us going, oh, I'm losing my identity, couldn't it be more of we can all learn something from each other?
My whole life and existence is multicultural. My dad was in the Army. He's a career Army officer, so I understand all that. So I never had issues with that. But when you went to that nail salon, and they had a couple of riots at a couple of Asian-owned nail salons in New York City and Brooklyn. I don't know if you saw those. Yes. Go do it. Look it up. Google it.
Because they were speaking their language?
No, because the community thinks that community has taken over that business, the hair business, the nail business, and all those kind of things that you just spoke about. So my little contort back to you is, why didn't you ask them how they create all these businesses and we're not? They're selling all their products to us.
But you know what? Whose fault is that?
It's our fault.
I mean, I'm just throwing it out there.
I said, rather than learning their language, I'd rather learn how they make money selling all these products to our people. That's what I'd rather do. That's just a different opinion.
Okay. All right. Not a problem.
They purchase them and they sell them.
But they control the distribution system. It's why they control it, and that's how they continue to have what they have, and we don't have it.
Yeah, well, that's true, but I have a black nail tech. So, you got to try to support your own, and she's good, too. So I don't have to worry about the language barrier.
Oh, gosh. Let's talk to Bill in Newport News. Hi, Bill. You're on the air.
Hi. It's funny you should be talking about Vietnamese. I happen to be in a relationship with a Korean gal. And I've experienced, I'm a white guy. I've never really experienced racism until I started dating her. And it isn't confined to just white people. It goes across the races.
Absolutely.
That's right.
And that's a big eye opener. The other comment I'd like to make is I think that as time goes by, I think you're going to see the races melting together.
And
you're going to have more people like me, getting together with an Asian person.
Okay. All right. And that's one of the things that you were talking about, Tim. The whole idea of the melding of the races, people coming together into interracial.
Yeah, I'm not sure that the whole thing will just become one homogeneous brown, salad. I'm just thinking that the dialogue will become more and more complicated as I have lived my own life and met people who are of many, racial backgrounds. Some people, you don't know their mom is white. You don't know their dad is white. You don't know their pop is Latino. And so you learn to just treat them as people. And you begin to rethink things like assuming about who someone is culturally, and I think that changes the discourse.
Well, it was very interesting too in looking at the census. They were very careful to say people who identify as white because for that very reason, because there's so many people who have so many mixed backgrounds.
That's being politically correct.
That's being politically correct?
That is correct. Census now you're doing that.
I think, when you opened with our responsibility to welcome, I think as an individual, it's my responsibility to welcome whoever comes into my space.
Oh, that's a good thing.
And so then as we continue to do that as individuals, then that will help with whatever the environment, culture, language barrier, economic opportunity, or whatever it might be. So I think if we do that more, that'll be beneficial.
Okay, Butch?
Although the artificial construct of race will probably, the curve at which it integrates is probably, remember Loving was 1963?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
We had force of law behind keeping now that's evaporated, and in none of the 50 states is that a lawful practice anymore. So one would expect that the curve would start to accelerate.
Mm-hmm. I'm reading The Color of Law now, and hopefully we are going to have Mr. Rothstein on the show very soon. But when you talk about law and how changing laws, some laws take a lot longer to change than others. That's very, very interesting. I want to move us on to, let me check with Lisa. Miss Producer, should we move on to another topic or?
I think we should.
Okay, let's talk to Gary in Virginia Beach. Hi, Gary. You're on the air.
I apologize. I didn't hear everything, but what I did hear, it's a great discussion, and you guys have done a great job. Just one comment and just one question, and then I'll take the answer offline.
Okay, thanks.
First off, I think this whole issue of what we're seeing in terms of race relations, we just need to do a better job of getting out of our comfort zone. Most of us, besides where we work, we live in environments where we don't see people that don't look like us or don't speak the same language. So, anytime we can invite people over to our home and break bread and do things where we're getting out of our comfort zones, I think that's going to help. The question I have, it gets back, and I'm glad you guys talked about the linkage between economics and this issue of education. I really believe that achievement gaps that we see in the schools, which translate into earnings gaps in the workplace and wealth gaps down the road, that if you look at that trend and the fact that we are becoming a browner nation, and you look down the road 40, 50 years, if we don't do something to correct those economic trends, I think it's going to have a detrimental impact on our overall economy, and I'd love to hear your comments about that. And again, great job, great discussion. I'm going to take the answer offline.
Thanks, Gary. We appreciate that. Okay, Bill, go ahead. Respond.
Yeah, I'm right on that. I just believe it. And you look at any great society, I want to look in the future, but I also want to look back and see how great nations of society become non-existent. You don't control your borders, you don't control your culture, you don't control your language, and you don't control fairness in your economic systems. You're going to have 1%, like in America today, control most of everything. And that's going to continue. That's race. That's blended. That's just what it is. Mm-hmm. And then what's happening now is that with the Chinese and the Russians, they're globalizing this. They have their own little society. China, and I'm an economist, and I looked this number up, has over 250 million Chinese that are considered in their middle class. 250 million out of 3 or 2 billion, however many they have. Russia has about 98 million people that are these parts of these oligarchs that are spreading money down to that class of people. The poor and the uneducated, like that gentleman was saying, are the ones that are being left out because they can't distinguish between the difference. And that's what's going on here in America today. And we don't want to look in the mirror, but I can tell you right now, every last one of my personal friends, every last one of them sent their children to private schools. We all did, because we recognized that this race thing wasn't going to get solved in our lifetime. We recognized it. So we knew the currency of the future was currency. Politics now is currency. All these discussions we're having now are currency-based, and it's not only in America. It's in China, it's in Russia, or Eastern Europe, and it's in Asia, and it's in America. And until we fundamentally recognize, until we give every baby that's born, and I'm a proud granddad,
congratulations,
all of the issues of the sources that she needs to be successful in this world, number one is economics and controlling her environment. And that's the only way you can do it these days, in my judgment.
All right, Daun, you got the last word.
Oh, I do have the last word?
Yes.
Oh, this. Oh, okay.
On this.
Well, as people of color, we have to, do that mindset. We can't say that I got mine and my child got to get theirs. We got to get ours and give our child a leg up financially and educationally in order for us to make a difference.
Well, let me transition, though. That's a good way to transition to the whole issue of LeBron James. We've been talking a little bit about him and the fact that he did open the school. There was a lot of back and forth. The president weighed in with his tweet calling LeBron, saying that Don Lemon made LeBron James look smart. And there was when Don Lemon was reading a tweet from CNN commentator Keith Boykins about President Trump and minorities and this whole issue. Let's take a listen.
In Trump's world, Obama, Kenyan, LeBron James, dumb, Don Lemon, dumb, Maxine Waters, low IQ, black countries, shitholes, black athletes, SOBs, black tenants, unwelcome. Black workers, lazy. Central Park 5, guilty. Mexicans, rapists. Muslims, terrorists. Indians, fake. Nazis, wait for it, very fine people.
Butch.
Boom.
Boom.
I hadn't heard it distilled that way, but it's kind of hard to run from his own words.
Yeah, amen.
Donald Trump also said, Senator McCain, coward, President Bush, a liar, Rosie O'Donnell, whatever. I mean, that's him. That's that man. That's not America. I mean, he's just an old person setting his ideas. Hold 1 second.
I'm not going to say a word.
And Don Lemon won't go through the other issues that he talked to everybody. He talks to everybody like that because he's a disrespectful person. But he got elected. So, but my point is, that's not the problem. That is not the problem. President Obama is not dumb. LeBron
or
James,
Kenyan.
Yeah, I mean, no, he's not, or doesn't have a birth certificate. I mean, he has insulted everybody on the face of the earth. So that's not he's just using that to do ratings. It has nothing to do with what's effectively happening to America. What's effectively happening to America, and we should all be ashamed of ourselves. 85 people were shot in Chicago, 11 dead. We've had 66 shootings over here in Newport News
and Hampton.
That's pregnant women that are shot, 16 and 17 and 18-year-olds. They're getting younger and younger. I'll listen to Don, and I hear all this stuff, but I set priorities in my life. And I am sick and tired of seeing our children on the streets. Let's go to another little issue here. Oh, they don't want to separate men from women and their babies from the... That's what America's welfare system does. If you're a man and you have a baby, you can't live with them in the housing projects. You cannot. You cannot have an association with them. Let's fix that problem of putting these families back together. So I hate to be passionate about this, but I'm so sick. And I was commissioner for welfare reform for Virginia, and we tried to get that stopped. We couldn't get it stopped by either side. So I hear the words. The words don't mean anything, but look at our very own communities and let's set higher priorities.
Okay. Tim?
I mean, certainly, Bill, I agree. You know, we want to do work in our own communities and so on, but I do think Trump's words are important. I do think he creates a kind of atmosphere that allows a certain mentality to thrive that was, I thought, on its deathbed. But I don't know that it is anymore. And I think his ignorance and his simple-mindedness, though it might look innocent, I think is really deadly. Also, his constant attacks on the media and about how media is all lying. It's all, we can't trust it. All those things add up to very scary times in America because you have a substantial number of relatively not well-educated whites, maybe some people of color too. You have a relatively substantial number of people who really believe what he says. Now, there are many educated whites who probably feel as skeptical as people of color about what Trump says, but there are many people in his base who are like, yeah, every bit of crap he says is the truth. This is why this character who's sponsoring this march in D.C. in celebration or in remembrance of what happened in Charlottesville last year. This is why these characters have come out of the sewers. This is why I think Trump's words are dangerous, in that we have to address him. Certainly the other issues you brought up are critical, but we have to deal with this character as well.
Words do matter. Words do matter, and negative words are internalized.
Well, Bill says this is not America, but you also said, Bill, he was elected president. So is it America or isn't it?
And he got 85% of Republicans' support. I'm saying the language that he's using and the taunts and this thing that he's doing is not America. That's Donald Trump. That's an individual effort on his part.
That's America. It's individuals in America. I'm not going to, put that on everybody, because you just can't generalize like that. Mm-hmm. But we have known that there are people who have been prejudiced and don't want to see anybody be successful of a certain race, no matter where they live. They might have been quiet. We might have thought that there were changes, but they've always been there. That hadn't changed. I'm dealing with that right here in the city of Norfolk as an elected official. So that, I am 62. So I've been dealing with it, and it's still happening. So it's not new. It's not hidden. It was more subdued. And the president has just helped it to show itself. And I think in the revelation of that, then that will help people of color and others who want our country to be better, to galvanize together, to change it. Mm-hmm. And that goes back to the vote, too.
Butch.
I admire your optimism and believing that you thought that it had been stamped out. But I grew up in rural North Carolina. I knew for a fact it was there.
I didn't think it was stamped out.
I know, and I appreciate
it was maybe dying down a bit.
And God bless you. God bless you for hoping that. I do think the curve is disappearing to zero, but I think it's disappearing slower than we would like and would have hoped. For the longest time, it was underwater because it was suppressed because it was a third rail, and those people didn't have voice. The internet has given any idiot who can buy a computer voice now, whereas once upon a time when you got your news from the New York Times, Washington Post, and the whatever your local paper was, in the LA Times, and only certain people had a megaphone. Now everybody's got a megaphone, and all you have to do is click a button, and all of a sudden you can get the stupidest thing ever goes viral, and it gets 50,000, 100,000, 200,000 views. So stupid people have a megaphone that they've never had before. I appreciate. I wish you were right, but I know in my heart of heart that was there, and this environment has given it permission to flourish again.
That's what I'm worried about. The resurgence.
So do you guys? A lot of times people say uneducated people, people of less means are feeling this way and so forth, but racism is insidious and it's everywhere. So is it really class and lack of education, or really is it everywhere? And so you may have the good sense not to publicly express how you do things, but at the same time you're still doing it.
I think if you check out the demographic of Trump supporters, I think the preponderance of them would not be college graduates necessarily. This is not to say there aren't college graduates, et cetera, who do support him. But I think the heart of his base are people who are not particularly adept at critical thinking, and that's why Fox News really runs their lives in many respects. And of course, Trump simply echoes whatever Fox News says. So I think they're largely in his hands. I don't think you're going to run into the same numbers of well-educated whites who see Trump in the same uncritical way. This is not to say they may not support him, but I just think the uncritical support he gets is largely because of people who are that heart of his base are not thinking in the way that maybe they might.
A young African American congressman from Missouri, St. Louis, taught us in college, University of Kansas, a long time ago. No permanent friends, no permanent enemies, only permanent interests. So you get caught up in this political stuff, I'm voting and I'm supporting Trump's policies. Lower taxes, protect America, border security, making America an emphasis on making sure that our folks are taken care of, just as people want their families not to be divided. I want them to change the welfare laws so black men can be there. I want them to change these crazy, archaic marijuana laws where our young black men are being locked up in insidious rates that are just losing their whole lives. And I will take Trump a delegate. I admit it, because I wanted to be inside the game. I didn't want to be outside. If you're inside, you can do a little bit, but I do agree with the policies. We can't take care of the world anymore. We just don't generate. I look at the numbers. The Chinese are building land mass out there in the South China Seas. It's purposeful, because they know they have too many people of influence that are not going to take some of those conditions that they're in and other things, and so they can sort their military and in other ways. I also think Mr. Trump also understands, and I just learned this by attending a Pentagon briefing about 3 months ago, that our Navy is adequate. I mean, it's inadequate. It's so far behind the technology, the new stuff that the Russians and the Chinese are building. We're not ready to take on that force the way we should to protect ourselves. My whole point, I never support men and women. They're going to disappoint you. I'm going to disappoint people. But I like Daun Hester. I always will be a supporter of her, and that's true, because I like her policies on education and her policies on fairness. And so I'm not going to be disappointed by anything but what I can do to make things work forward.
And so, and the best way to make that happen is to get out and
we're not going to vote.
Oh,
we didn't vote the last time. We didn't vote the last time.
You don't think we're going to vote this time?
No.
Really? We got a minute 30 left. Dawn, are we going to vote this time?
Left. Yeah, we're going to vote this time.
Okay.
We'll see. In Virginia, we're going to vote. I can't speak for everywhere else, but even in, Ohio, they did pretty good. That 1%, difference, So people are engaged, and people don't. I don't believe people like the division that is being caused and created by the policies of our president. I too wish that they would change laws, especially as it relates to welfare. I've always thought that was wrong. However, they ain't working on that. Excuse me. They're not working on that. They're not working on anything that's going to impact people of low income means. I haven't seen it. And I haven't heard it. Now, if they do, I'll be happy. I'll help. But I haven't seen that. All I see is people getting money and other people not.
And with that, we are out of time. Thank you so much, Roundtable. I really appreciate you guys being here, and we'll have to continue this conversation. So very thought-provoking discussion today, and if you'd like to hear it again or share it with a friend, please visit our website, anotherviewradio.org, and download the podcast. And while you're there, please sign up for our eView newsletter. That way you will know about upcoming shows on Another View. We're on Facebook, so like us, and I'm on Twitter at Barbara Ham Lee. Next week on Another View, changing the narrative about African-American philanthropy, going from that idea of us being takers as opposed to givers. It's going to be a great discussion with Valadia Fullwood, author of Giving Back. Our theme music was composed and performed by Jay Sennett. Lisa Godley is our show producer. Todd Washburn is our audio engineer, and Janae Jackson answered our phones. We're sending our love to our teammate Victor Bowen and his bride-to-be Joya, who are getting married this weekend. Congratulations to the Bowens. Enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you so very, very much for listening to Another View.